All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here for our webinar titled From Academia to Community, Pausing to Reflect on Authentic Community Engagement in Human Milk Equity Research. We're so excited to have you here. We're just going to get started with a bit of housekeeping and just kind of orienting you to what we're going to be talking about today. So for housekeeping, please keep yourself muted until the question and answer portion of the webinar, during which time I'll invite you to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question to our speakers. The webinar will be recorded and distributed after the event. We'll also share the slides out afterwards as well to anyone who's registered for the event, and you're welcome to share those with anyone who was not registered but might be interested in viewing them. We'll also be applying for continuing education credits or continuing education units after the event. We'll send an email with details afterwards about how you can receive those if you attended the live event, as well as which specifically we've applied for and received. And we also invite you to please put your questions in the chat box, whether those be questions for the speakers or any sort of technical assistance needs that you might have, and I'll work to address those during the event. This is an overview of how we'll run through the webinar today. So we'll have about 30 minutes to hear from our panelists, and then we'll move into a panel discussion with some questions for each of our panelists. We'll have time for Q&A, and then we'll end with just a brief conclusion. And I do want to share a bit about the UIC sponsors for this webinar, which are the Office of Community Engagement and Neighborhood Health Partnerships, or Ocean HP at UIC, as well as the Nutrition, Obesity, Health Equity, and Food Justice, or NOHE Research Group at UIC. Ocean HP is a department at UIC that offers and engages in a variety of community-based programming in partnership with communities to support health. Ocean HP is sort of an umbrella for NOHE, which is a community-based participatory research group at UIC that does research related to health equity and food. One project that we're really excited about that ties really nicely to this webinar today is the 3 years of work that we've been engaged in with the Illinois State Physical Activity and Nutrition, or ISPAN, Breastfeeding Equity Project. Through this project, we've engaged in coalition and capacity building by establishing and maintaining a learning collaborative of human milk equity stakeholders, providing mini grants, and providing education opportunities to individuals who are interested in supporting human milk equity. We're really excited to bring you all this event, and we look forward to introducing you to some of our speakers today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Joanne Allen. So let me just spotlight her for everyone to see. And Joanne Allen has over 4 decades of experience in maternal and child health. She is a refired, as she calls it, which is semi-retired nurse and international board certified lactation consultant after over 40 years of service. Joanne is a member of Community Engagement Research Incubator and Strategy Hub, Cherish, and the Chicago region, and a member of the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force. So Joanne, I will turn it over to you now to share a bit about the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force, as well as your other work that you're engaged in.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with my presentation talking about the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force. So for some reason, it's not letting me go back to that one. Okay, here we go. Thank you. So welcome everybody, and thank you for being here for our presentation today. I'm proud to start with talking about my involvement with the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force, which I've been a member for probably over 20 years. What we do, we're lactivists, we're nurses, lactation consultant, peer counselors, doula, community workers, mothers. And if you see in this picture, yes, fathers who have helped and support their families breastfeeding, researchers. So this is a very diverse group. We advocate. We want our mothers to get the best source of milk for their baby. We network with each other and collaborate. We educate families, communities. We take action. we come together with other advocates to help with different things, different lobbyists. So the one thing that I'm really proud of is recently for the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force, we participate and sponsor World Breastfeeding events. We strategize to make our city and our communities more breastfeeding friendly. And this picture was taken just a couple weeks ago on the South Side at St. Benedict the African Church in Inglewood, where we came together with many groups and provided an event for families to provide education, support, and lots of good information from the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force. And if you have any questions or want to become a member of the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force, look for us, go to www.crbtf.com. Again, the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force is at work in our city to promote and support all human milk feeding for our families. And that'll take me to my presentation. And I'm my part of the From Academia to Community Pausing to Reflect Authentic Community Engagement in Human Milk Feeding and Equity Research. And I am Joanne Allen. I don't have any disclosures other than say I am on many of the councils of the programs that we'll be talking about today. And I do have my own Mama Joanne Lactation Consultant, LLC, which I work with. So next. This is how my anxieties are gonna work. So we're here to talk about breastfeeding. But we're going to start by introducing you, if you haven't heard, this week begins the 9th year for the Black Breastfeeding Week. Black Breastfeeding Week goes from August 25th to the 31st, and it actually starts tomorrow, and this is the 9th year. And this year, the theme is the big pause, collective work for collective power. We're going to honor the need for rest, and I'm sure many of you, if you think about the things that have happened during these last year and a half, you could take a rest, but we're not gonna rest for long because we, like the founders of Black Breastfeeding Week, who are Kadada Green, and she's also the founder of the Black Mothers Breastfeeding Association in Detroit. Another founding member of the Black Breastfeeding Week was Kimberly Seals, and many of you may have heard about her and her book, The Great Letdown. And Anaya Sangodele Ayako. Wow. And we are here, they created Black Breastfeeding Week to recognize the challenge, but also to uplift the triumphs of Black families. So we know there's some challenges, but we want to speak to and uplift the triumph of Black families as they go to breastfeed. We know that some of the reasons that the top 5 reasons that Black Breastfeeding Week is needed, many people ask why, is because the high rate of infant mortality that Black mothers experience, especially when you think about, in this day and age, we should not have the high infant mortality rates with the technology and advances, but in Black communities, we do. The health disparities, we know that there are not the same resources in every community, and your zip code can determine your health outcome. There is a lack of diverse lactation providers. I remember when I became a lactation consultant in 1994, I was one of only 2 or 3 Black lactation consultants that I knew of in the city of Chicago. There are challenges, the cultural challenges that our Black families face. And there's definitely a lack of support for the promotion of breastfeeding. It's kind of like a second thought. Yeah, they want to breastfeed. Yeah, we'll help them. The high infant mortality rates experienced by Black mothers is demonstrated even in my own family. We know that there's a high rate of premature births. And one of the main causes of death in the premature baby is necrotizing enterocolitis. And we know that breast milk or human milk can help decrease the risk of it and also improve the outcome. I can tell you in my own family, I've experienced an infant who was born prematurely, not me personally, but my niece, my great nephew was born prematurely. And He passed in the NICU. He never came home at about 11 or 12 months old, and he passed because of the effects of necrotizing enterocolitis. Health disparities are very, very evident, and that's a main reason that we need Black Breastfeeding Week. We know that the Black family structure is devastated because of the unequal number of men and women who are put into jails, the stress of our environments, the stress of our community. Just look at all the things that's happening around this woman, and she's trying to breastfeed, she's trying to protect her baby, the social groups, the lack of empowerment that occur. However, we know that there is a lack of diverse lactation consultants, but the triumph is we have people like Health Connect One and Reaching Our Sisters everywhere who, because of the research, recognized and identified that there was a need for more lactation consultant support in our community. And this is an example where they came into the community in Chicago and actually trained a number of people from the community, doulas, peer counselors, lactation counselors, and they went through a special class to train them to be able to sit for the exam to become an international board certified lactation consultant, which is the golden standard. So that was a great experience. And you can see here, this group is a very diverse group, and many of them have now gone on to take the exam. Unfortunately, we have to acknowledge that there was historical cultural challenges that has separated the positivity of breastfeeding in our culture. Black slaves during slavery and even after slavery were forced to be wet nurses. They had to nurse the plantation owner's baby while their own baby oftentimes went unfed. There's been generational trauma because of this, led to a poor connection in many families. But we've triumphed and we have begun breastfeeding even more because we recognize the importance. But the health disparities have continued to limit the access. And this is a paper that my colleagues and I wrote recently, and it was published in the Breastfeeding Medicine Journal in 2021. And it talks about the hospitals on the south side of Chicago that have closed, and thereby creating a birth hospital or birth unit desert. People have to go out of their community to deliver their babies, which also will decrease their access to support and promotion for human milk. There's insurance bias. If you don't have the right insurance, you may not have a lactation consultant or even a counselor. We know that there's prejudice. There are many times that people look at a Black woman and feel like because she's Black, she's not gonna breastfeed. There's limited research on the Black feeding experience, and I really wanna uplift our researchers here today for contributing to the limited research. But I experienced this insurance bias, and that's one of the reasons I became a lactation consultant, because oftentimes the lactation consultants in our hospital would not come and see the poor mothers. So I became a lactation consultant during the time that women were coming back to the clinic with their babies at 24 hours, and their babies were jaundiced and not eating well. But oftentimes the lactation consultant would come and see the richer doctors' wives or other people of class that she felt needed to help, but not necessarily provide that same service for my Black mamas. Authentic community engagement in human milk feeding research is an example that this is a picture, and I took this picture at BEMFA's breastfeeding in Motown. It was really a great experience in Detroit. And this is a doula working with a family. The BEMFA took training from Health Connect One to have doulas in the community. They used the research to show that doulas taking care of mothers from their own community help mothers thrive, they help babies thrive, they increase breastfeeding rates, they increase infant thriving on breast milk. So this is an example of research being taken back to the community. And you heard about the NOHE and the I-SPAN. And just as, again, as a disclaimer, I am a member of the NOHE Advisory Committee. And I'm also a member of the Breastfeeding Research Advisory Board for Amica's Mother's Milk Connection app, which you'll hear about. I'm also very proud to be a member of the Community Engagement Research Incubator and Strategy Hub, our Cherish, which is a Community Advisory Council, our CAG village member for UCFS. And this is something that I've been a part of for a year and a half, and I'm really proud. And as you see, the UCFS Cherish CAG village member, what we do is we are key partners in moving forward, moving the work of research forward in the community. We are key participants in guiding nationwide academic and community-based research. We strengthen the links to the BIPOC community. So as a member, we meet every month. We go over many projects that are occurring, and we inform the different committees within the Cherish group. So this is an example. I took this picture because I'm not just a member, but they provided business cards so that we could be visible, that they thought that we were not just an advisor, we are an important part of the research committee. And as I say, I've been a member for a while, and just as an example, we started as a group, and we were part of what was called the priority study. So what we did as a CAG, we came together as a nationwide to help with the nationwide registry to assess the impact of COVID-19 on pregnant people, regardless of how pregnancies end and their newborn. Because what was happening is this priority study was a big study nationwide, but they were not enrolling BIPOC. So if you don't have the Black, Indigenous, people of color within these studies, then you're not going to know their outcomes. And we have to recognize that COVID has devastated the Black community a lot more than some of the other communities. So it's important that we be included in this research. So another thing that we've done is we've helped with what's called RPACs, the research priorities. And what we do is we got together with different community partners, and they talk about what's happening and how they're impacted and their responses to COVID. And we help identify the most unanswered questions that they have about COVID-19 and their pregnancy during the pandemic. And we have prioritized those questions. And those are the questions that will then be used to do further research rather than just going into a community and doing research. The community is involved in the research. The community has a say in that research. And that's an example of what we're here to share with you today. And now I'm going to turn it over to our next researcher about what she's doing and how she's using her community advisory committee. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Joanne. And I'm going to provide just a brief overview of Dr. Amica Jefferson's work. So Dr. Amica Jefferson is an associate professor at Rush University College of Nursing. She has over 16 years of clinical experience caring for mothers and critically ill infants that revealed the impact of implicit bias on the provision of breastfeeding support. Her work expands best practices in maternal child health that promote equity and social justice breastfeeding support for African-American mothers. So I'll turn it over to you, Urmeka.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Good, there you go. Thank you for that introduction. I'm excited to be part of the panel and share my work that has led me to expanding the reach of breastfeeding support. Based on my clinical experience, my program of research has focused on developing an intervention to reduce breastfeeding disparities and improve health outcomes, specifically among African-American mothers. My work has centered around the three main topics you see here. I started out examining the association of infant feeding exposure and attitudes to breastfeeding intentions. And I focused on that, excuse me, because the area where I was working, we had a lot of interventions available in the community and in the hospital. However, it showed very little impact on increasing breastfeeding rates among African-American mothers. And so I wanted to just dig a little deeper and just kind of get a baseline of where we need to start and why these interventions are not sustainable. I went on to look at determinants of breastfeeding behavior among African American and rural mothers, and I'm currently using technology to improve access to breastfeeding support services. So I'll give a brief overview and some key findings from this research, and there'll be time for more questions later. So starting out my studies on infant feeding exposure, attitudes, and intentions, I used a population or a sample from college students, African-American college students who had not had children, because education had not shown why or had not explained the gap or the disparity that we see in breastfeeding. And data has shown that African-American college-educated women still breastfeed at a lower rate than college-educated white women. And I found out that, the students had a good knowledge about breast milk and knew that breastfeeding was healthier and it was optimal feeding, but they did feel formula feeding was more convenient, especially if the mom worked outside the home. They had positive attitudes toward breastfeeding, and this was associated with greater intentions to breastfeed. And we know that the stronger their intentions to perform a behavior, the more likely that behavior will occur. So it's real important to try to work to get people to initially have intentions to breastfeed. I found that breastfeeding exposure, particularly positive exposure, did have a significant influence on their attitudes toward breastfeeding. And they had more favorable views about breastfeeding. When I took a look at race and gender, it did contribute significantly to breastfeeding intentions. When just look at that alone, meaning the white students had greater intentions to breastfeed compared to the Black students. But I did find that breastfeeding exposure and attitudes had a much stronger contribution to the difference that I was seeing in breastfeeding intentions. Excuse me. That had a stronger contribution to the difference I saw in breastfeeding intentions. So when you think about what is the impact of race and that racial disparity that we see in breastfeeding, it appears that that impact operates through the link of breastfeeding exposure and attitudes and the influence it has on intentions. So as I continue to look at breastfeeding behavior, particularly among African-American mothers, this study was with mothers who were both breastfeeding and formula feeding. And I did some interviews to look at their exposure and personal experiences. And I found that women had exposure through their personal circle. Those women that had that close contact, they were able to breastfeed for longer duration. But other women who had more distant exposure, such as from their healthcare providers, they did get specific information and education about breastfeeding. And this led everyone to feel like, okay, I at least want to try to breastfeed. I know that breastfeeding is better. But when it came to their personal experiences, they had a really hard time navigating the demands of breastfeeding. They all talked about how difficult it was. It was not what they expected. Many women talked about the untold stories of breastfeeding, and it just wasn't what they expected. However, some women were able to overcome those challenges and continue breastfeeding for a longer duration, while others made a switch to formula. Now, they struggled with that decision because they really wanted to continue breastfeeding, and they felt guilty once they had switched to formula. One mother even talked about how difficult a decision this was for her because in the hospital, a nurse told her that formula feeding causes brain damage. So once she was at home and she wanted to switch to formula and she was struggling with breastfeeding, she was afraid to formula feed. So she was feeding her infant bottles of water to counteract what she presumed would be causing brain damage. And another thing that stood out that kind of crossed over between exposure and personal experience was my own research. And this is where women were talking about the research that they did. They would Google everything. So they had easy access to information. They were using their cell phones. And a lot of times in the interview, they would bring out their phone and say, see, I found this. And the mom that was feeding her infant water had read on a mommy blog that it was okay to give your baby water. So this is what really led to my intervention and use of technology. But before I talk about the technology, I also took a closer look at the group of moms that made the switch to formula so I could get a better understanding and just see what their struggles were and look at what were any behavioral, personal, environmental factors. And I found that they had very short durations of breastfeeding. Many of them only planned to breastfeed in the hospital. And they just said that that was their intention. They just wanted to do the early breastfeeding because that was most important, to give the baby that good colostrum. And then others felt that breastfeeding was just too painful to continue. So they were happy with their decision to at least do the early breastfeeding. And they had perceptions that you needed a perfect diet to breastfeed. Simplicity of formula rang out throughout the narratives. They thought formula was just as healthy. Particularly, people talked about how when they were breastfeeding, their baby was losing weight, but when they started formula feeding, the infant was gaining more weight, so they felt it was just as healthy. They had diverse support networks, had a lot of support, basically emotional support. They didn't have physical support, but they had encouragement to continue breastfeeding. And some of the partners were, in fact, upset when they made the decision to switch to formula. And finally, they talked about lack of access to breastfeeding support. Had lots of great support in the hospital. They had nurses and lactation consultants available to help, but the gap existed when they got home. And they just didn't know who to turn to, didn't have other mothers in their circle, particularly other African-American mothers that they could breastfeed, that had breastfed, that they could turn to for help. And breastfeeding included extra costs for bras and pumps and the storage bags. So those were some deterrents for breastfeeding. So I learned from this research that we need to improve prenatal breastfeeding exposure and attitudes for African-American mothers. Really need to promote the visibility of African-American mothers breastfeeding in our patient education, the resources and media, change the view of how we see breastfeeding for the African-American community. It needs to be seen as a norm and not something that white mothers do. Ensure that women are given the tools to successfully breastfeed and know what to expect in those early weeks of breastfeeding. We do a great job of talking about the benefits of breastfeeding, but women really need to know the benefits of breastfeeding based on for the greater duration and how you see a greater benefit with the longer you breastfeed, and educate them on how to breastfeed and talk about infant feeding in a very positive way. That's really important because formula feeding is the only other alternative for breastfeeding. So we don't want mothers to feel guilty about formula feeding. We don't want to put such emphasis on breastfeeding that they think they can't formula feed. So it's really important to make sure we use positive strategies and talk when we're talking about infant feeding. While breast milk and breastfeeding is the optimal feeding method because of the health benefits, you don't want to promote or use scare tactics that could lead to unhealthy behaviors and poor outcomes. And then lastly, just want to focus on increasing racially congruent support. So we need more African-American lactation consultants and peer counselors, like Joanne talked about earlier. We need innovative ways to connect women. So my solution is the intervention framework of Mother's Milk Connection. I basically took what we have used in general practice, things that we've known for a while that have been effective for breastfeeding support, but they operated in silos. So I kind of took that and put it into one convenient app called the Mother's Milk Connection. This research was supported by the University of Missouri. And I worked with an advisory board there to refine the features of each app. And then just recruited a group of moms, a small group of mothers, breastfeeding mothers, to use the app so they could use it in a real world experience as they were discharged from the hospital to give me some feedback. And here's where I am now. I have funding for this research by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And with this funding, I'm able to reconstruct the Mother's Milk Connection app. And my focus is on expanding the reach of breastfeeding support, especially for African-American mothers. And REACH stands for Resources, Education, Activity Tracking System, Customized Notification and Messages, and Help from Peers. So the good thing about the app is you have all of these components in one convenient location. So no matter where you live, if you don't have any kind of breastfeeding resources in your community and you have the app, you at least have these 5 components to help support you with breastfeeding. And I've listed there some of the different features. It's not an exclusive list, but just some of the things that we'll have in each different component. And hopefully, for mothers that will use each component, it will help them with each step kind of, on that journey, have a successful breastfeeding journey. What I like most, or what I'm most excited about, is that women are able to self-manage their breastfeeding experience because you have all of these available, and it's not required to use, or it's not one within the other. Different points and different times in your breastfeeding, you may need more education and you may want to focus on the activity, but each mom will be able to use the component that best meets her needs at that time with breastfeeding. And so I'm also working with a more formal advisory board here to refine the features in each component, because I want to make sure that the app and the components meet the needs of mothers, particularly have contextual and culturally congruent and relevant for African American mothers. So finally, here I'll end with, I have a list of my most relevant publications. I know this will be distributed, so I wanted to just make sure you could find more detailed information about the research that I briefly reviewed here for you. And the good thing about it being Breastfeeding Month, one of these, number 5, Breastfeeding Medicine, is making their issues. They have 2 issues for breastfeeding and the African American experience. You can access those articles for free. So there are 2 full special issues they have for breastfeeding, and you can access those until the end of the month. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Urmeka. Let me just get our next presenter ready to go, and then I'll do their introduction. Okay, so next we have Dr. Elizabeth Johnson, who is an assistant professor of molecular nutrition at Cornell University. Her research focuses on understanding how nutrients in infant diets affect the gut microbiome and overall health. Dr. Johnson is the recipient of an NIGMS Early Stage Investigator Outstanding Investigator Award and is a CFAR Global Scholar in the Humans and the Microbiome program. I'll turn it over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you, Marjorie. And it's really a pleasure echoing all the panelists, not only being here, but being able to prepare for this event. And I would say that that I'm a academic researcher, but also Black breastfeeding mom. So it's always really near and dear to my heart, the research that we do in the lab and the communities that we interact with. So I will start with kind of saying that where our research stands is kind of as Dr. Jefferson was just talking about in her presentation, which was absolutely fantastic, was that trying to provide the evidence for what we know is the health promoting effects of human milk, and giving the specifics so that it can be put into place, the support that's needed to sustain breastfeeding in multiple communities. And so today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about how we go about in the lab figuring out these specifics of how human milk is supporting infant health. And so here I just like to show a picture of my team. These are all the amazing researchers that I get to work with and the machinery that we use in order to analyze and understand human milk. So when we think about human milk, my lab is really focused on how human milk is supporting the infant gut microbiome. These are the collection of beneficial bacteria that inhabit the human intestinal tract. And these bacteria have really important connections to health in supporting immune system development, infant metabolism, and also neural development. And why it's so important to focus on the gut microbiome during this period of time is that the proper conditioning of these systems can really set up babies for health later all throughout life. And so when we think about how we acquire our beneficial bacteria, we the fetus is in this immune protected environment of the womb right here, a very, very cozy place to be. And then all of a sudden, there's a delivery event where there's mass exposure to microbes, either through the vaginal canal or through being delivered by cesarean section. And this starts kind of a process of infants acquiring microbes that should be beneficial and trying to ward off microbes that may be pathogenic or may cause disease. And so within this, there are many ways that you may acquire microbes. Of course, babies touch a lot of things, are in a lot of different environments, but it's well known that there's something special about the microbes that are inhabiting the infant gut. And I'm just showing you here, even caregivers try to influence this through the addition of probiotics to supplementing infant nutrition. But we know that it's not just who's there that's very important. Actually, it's just a very small part of the picture. It's actually the nutrients in human milk that are there to sustain the beneficial members of the infant microbiome. So here I'm showing you specialized sugars that are found in mother's milk that are made for almost solely the purpose of nurturing beneficial microbes in the infant gut, and how in turn these microbes can produce nutrients that then are then the infant or baby is exposed to that can have health benefits. And this particular set of structures I'm showing you here can influence how immune cells are activated in the infant. And you can imagine that when these particular nutrients are missing, that this leads to consequences in terms of which microbes are there and what they're making. And of course, when we're talking about why sustain breastfeeding, you can imagine there's a big difference when you have this constant exposure to these kind of microbe supporting nutrients over time versus not. And so where my lab comes is these are the sugars that are in human milk, but there are other nutrients in human milk that may have equal, if not more, effects on the beneficial microbes that inhabit the infant gut. And so we were really focused on how nutrients in the fat fraction of human milk could have an important role in sustaining the infant gut microbiome, for making the point that, the infant formula is really focused on supporting infant growth. But there are other things that human milk is functioning to do that support infant health beyond growth, and that includes nourishing the microbiome. And so what we did was we wanted to understand what are the differences in human milk for these particular special nutrients that are found in the fat fraction. And so this is our local target, and we just bought all these formulas, and we asked the question, what's different between these formulas, or what's in these formulas in terms of our molecules of interest. And so here I'm showing you an image where every peak here is a different nutrient than we find in human milk. And I hope you can appreciate that there is this richness in human milk that we all know can be missing in formula. But why is this important? And what's interesting about this is what we're trying to really have specific information to be able to share to support breastfeeding. And so this is just to show you that the actual molecules that we study, if you take a really deeper dive into those images that I just showed, that they can be very abundant in human milk and absent from even the most supplemented formulas, even ones that are supplemented with aspects of human milk fat. And so what's really cool about this to us is that we've developed a set of methods to show that, that these nutrients are actually being consumed by bacteria. And so that we can see, and so you can visualize that that baby's gut microbiome is really interacting with these nutrients. And this is an important process that happens with human milk feeding that we miss when these nutrients are not in infant formulas. And so what I'm showing you here is a microscope image of you were able to tag these nutrients red in the diet. And here I'm showing you the microbes, and the ones that are taking up, that are red, have actually taken up these nutrients from the diet, and the ones that are blue are kind of agnostic to that, but they, understanding, and then we're able to identify the microbes that are really kind of dependent on this exposure versus ones that aren't. So this is really exciting to us because it shows kind of visually how important some of these nutrients are and what they're doing and why they're so important to sustain the exposure to these nutrients over time. And so from this work that we've done in the lab, kind of looking at the specific kind of biochemical interactions, we really wanted to know, like, how exactly is this affecting human health? How, when we are just detailing this really, really large suite of nutrients that are dependent on the microbiome, so what? Does it matter if they're there or not? And so we're really trying to make the connection between diet, the microbiome, and infant health. So to do this, we've turned to caregivers and infant diapers to really give us a clue of when things are healthy and when things are looking not so healthy. And so the thought is, can we gain some insight? So the microbiome is really contained in the content of infant diapers, and we can analyze that content, but we can also look at how the infant diaper looks like and try to get a really understanding, is yellow good, is green not so good, or is yellow to green good, or things like that. And people have been doing this for a long time, but we think, can we put some of our techniques that we have in the lab in order to get a more precise understanding of what kind of the contents of infant diapers are telling us about health, and whether having certain microbial metabolites or nutrients in there is making a big difference. And so, excuse the stool photos. I always have to do this and I never do it soon enough, but this has been done for quite a long time. You can think about one of the biggest cases where you have an infant, a healthy breastfed infant diaper, and then you have the diaper of an infant that has a liver disease where there's no bile being made. And you can see one is, this nice kind of mustardy army green, and one is completely white. And so what we've been doing is we have you taken advantage of smartphones in interacting with our families to kind of to decrease the burden of collection of this information about infants' diapers. And what we can do is we collect health information, we collect photos, and we collect biosamples to really try to understand how, when you see changes in the microbiome, or you see changes in the physical properties of stool, what exactly precisely is going on, and can we use this as a really non-invasive way in order to understand more about infant health and how exposure to certain nutrients in infant nutrition, whether this is being human milk fed or formula fed, how is this really affecting baby's health on a very quantifiable level? And so we're really excited about this project. We call it, and we collect samples almost near daily from our families. And this is, we call it Daily Information About Poop Enhances Research, or diaper. And it's been, and we're still in the middle of this study, and we've learned quite a lot about diapers, and we are looking forward to learning more. I'll end with showing you kind of a photo of how we can take what's in the diaper and add some classifications to it to be able to really suss out what a lot of caregivers have seen, is that there's a lot of information on these diapers that we're missing, that we hope to be able to decipher. So with that, I want to just thank my team here, and the funders of our research who kind of believed in some of the big ideas we've had trying to use the microbiome to understand more about infant health. And with that, I thank you for your attention and I look forward to the questions.
Thanks so much, Dr. Johnson. So we're going to move into the panel portion of our webinar. So I'm just going to get everyone spotlighted so that you can see everyone well. And then I'll turn it over to Joanne to start asking some questions.
Wow, that was exciting, Liz. And I can tell you for years, one of the first questions I asked moms is, how does the poop look? But your analysis of what's in that poop sound really, I'm excited about those diapers. And Amica, thank you, because the things that you're doing, it really informs the work that I shared when we talk about the importance of increasing African-Americans in breastfeeding. I've been saying that for years, and sometimes I look back and like, I wish I had done more, but the important thing is we're doing it now. So I hope you continue your work, and I'm excited. Take this show on the road and continue as we look forward. I have a couple questions for you, and hopefully we'll get some questions in the chat. So my first question is to both of you. Excuse me, 1 minute. Got to look closely. So Mika and Liz, what are some challenges when trying to engage authentic community engagement? So what are some challenges when you're trying to engage in authentic community engagement, and how can you overcome these challenges?
Okay, you want me to go first? Okay. Some of the challenges I face, particularly because I've moved twice throughout my research trajectory here, I'm often viewed as an outsider in the community because I'm not known and I'm new to the community. So it's been a challenge to gain trust first initially, and then really be able to engage with the community. It's easy to think because I'm an African-American woman and I'm a mother and breastfeeding that I share membership with the community, but because I'm not from the community, it's still, you have to develop that trust. So that has sometimes been a challenge. One way that I've overcome that is by making connections with people that are well known and that are trusted in the community, and to begin to work with just even sometimes it's one person, it may be multiple, but I try to make as many connections as I can with people that are trusted members of the community. And then I also establish myself as a member of the community by being a part of the community, providing service where I can, and just getting out and getting to know the community. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is keeping people engaged has sometimes been a challenge. So I think just showing my appreciation for engaged community members that have engaged with my research, first of all, helps to keep them engaged, and finding people that just share a passion for the same thing as I do. And in this case, it's improving breastfeeding.
Yeah, I want to say that same sentiment for me, really, in terms of being an outsider and then trying to integrate multiple perspectives in the work that we're doing, because we really feel, even for us, like being biochemists and things like that, I think it's like even trying to fit into Mika, your world, and learn from that, because the biggest thing I learned here is that we wanted to that it is hard. It's a very special time in life, during when you're coming from the prenatal period and then you've delivered, and so you want to be able to provide parents with information and do research that's meaningful, but you also want to be really respectful of where they're coming from. And when you start at ground zero as a researcher, you're just like, well, how do I do this? And so I think that partnering with people who have experience, who've been in the community, is really, really important. And I think we learned, even from our research, we were having, people fill out paper surveys, and then we realized we need to go back, we needed to go in, and we spent 2+ years, and we still do this, developing this smartphone app. We said, we have the ability to do that. How can we actually make it so that we're not going to, just the people in our, 5-mile radius of the community, where we can actually, have a platform that we can reach more people. So I think it's always a challenge, but actually it's a very, it's one of the best parts of being in this kind of research community.
Wow. And I could just say that what you're doing in your research is going to inform what we do 10 or 15 years from now. And that's what's so important. And Amica, I don't know if you share with them, but you became a member of the task force, the Chicago Regional Task Force. You reached out to us because you were, as you said, coming into a new community, and you came to us. And I can only say you showing up and showing out, and thank you for all you've done with us, because sometimes if you don't go to the community, you miss a lot, so that you know what's happening. And as you say, getting those peer counselors, those community workers, those doulas, they are in the community, and I'm happy that you're a member. So I'm gonna ask a question of another question. How do we make academic research usable for the community? And I'll go with you first, Liz, since
well, I think that making sure that we do, things like this so that that is accessible. I think there's no point in really doing the research if you don't have researchers out there talking about the research in a way that serves the communities that that the research is being done for. I think that being creative and not maybe thinking about the traditional silos that we have is really important, and having more researchers who come from different communities. I think that's really important too, in terms of access. And I think that, yeah, and then the more, I think, to me, just working with people who have skills outside of my comfort zone, because I'm not necessarily the person who wants to be on TV or shouting things from the mountaintop, but I have really good friends and people who I work with who do. And so I think that without that, there's no point in doing this research at all, because we really need to take all the cool things that we're looking at in the lab, and the point of the whole thing is so that we can have that convincing argument, even though it seems so obvious, that we keep on hammering through that these are the resources that we need.
Same question, Amica.
Okay, I agree wholeheartedly with what Dr. Johnson has said. So I think just adding to that, having academic community partnerships are some ways to make research usable, because we can continue to do the research and we publish, but that's oftentimes in academic type journals, maybe that's not accessible for the community members. And then will they understand it, reading it directly from the academic journals? So I think another way is that healthcare providers, the providers that are serving the community, it's really important for them to take in that research evidence and translate it into practice and share it with the people that they serve in the community. So that makes research usable, for the community. And that's taking it from the research, because we can do the research all day long, but if nobody uses it, who cares? What's going to happen? We won't move that needle in the racial disparity we see in breastfeeding. So I think having those partnerships is good, because then you can help providers to translate it for the community. And definitely doing webinars like we do here, and then having health fairs, like the one we did, the task force did in Inglewood, where we were there ready and available to provide the education and information to the community in a way that they can take it in. And I'm excited about my app because the education that I'm providing in the app is for the community, but it's all research-based. It's not just based on my research, it's based on researchers before me, it's based on all the evidence and that we know, and then like things that Dr. Johnson's doing about the gut microbiome, taking that clinical research and bringing it to the community through the app and making that education available in a way that the mothers that use the app will be able to take it in and have an understanding of the difference between that microbiome with formula and with breastfeeding. Just gives them, I think, that extra education they need to understand why this is so important and why we think it's good for you to continue to breastfeed to the recommended length and time frame.
I like that, moving that needle. The research that you're doing now is gonna move the needle for what we do in the future. So now I do have another question. I think we have a little more time. And I just want to say the chat is blowing up. Everybody's loving all this information about these diapers. They're asking all kind of questions. So I'm going to ask you another question. And Liz, I'd like to ask you, because we know that this information about the microbiome is fairly new. Some people have heard of, but now we're getting it out to the community. And that's something that those mothers can do themselves. Look at that diaper and say, hey, wait a minute, this is changing colors. So how do you talk about the gut microbiome with parents and guardians to convey the importance of breastfeeding equity?
Yeah, I think we, in terms of how do we talk about it, I think that these parents are living it, probably know more than maybe we do about some of these situations. Actually, we interact with some parents who have actually really intense diaries about some of these things and learn from that. So I think that it's a two-way street when we're talking about the microbiome, because parents can really feel that, when things are changing with their baby and what are some of the tools that they can use in order to understand that, and the diaper is one of them. So I think when we're talking about microbiome, we try to make it really, really clear that this is a new field and we're learning, and we don't know what's necessarily good or versus bad, or that's very individualized, but it's something that's really important and can be very, there's evidence that it's very well supported by the nutrients, that you're not just supporting baby's nutrient needs and growth needs, but you're also supporting their microbiome's needs. And there's a lot of great things that every parent is doing to do that by when they're, concerned about those things. And really a reason why we did start the app is because, there's some times where you need to be worried and there's a lot of times when you don't. And if we could give clarity to that kind of, which is this, screaming is is this green diaper? I think this was a question. Is this green diaper bad or good? That's one of the top Googled searches when we're out there. And there's really sometimes if you talk to pediatricians, sometimes it's well, this is just nonsense. Don't pay attention to this. But there's, we're trying to figure out, is it nonsense or not? And maybe it's not the fact that diaper is green is what we're finding, but the fact that it was yellow yesterday and turned green today and may turn orange tomorrow is very important. And it's not necessarily just what you see in that period of time. So, but when it comes to equity, I think, with the app, what we really try to do is increase access and also with community partners. We started just in Ithaca, New York, this really small rural town. And now we're able to talk to mothers, spanning a whole range of different environments and communities. And so I think that's what's really important about our research, because we want to know, is that green diaper good or bad for everyone? We don't want to know if it's just that way in this particular community or not. So it's really important for us to be able to talk to parents about the gut microbiome from many different communities. So, yes.
Thank you, Liz. So, Amica, I have a question for you. And as I said, I just closed and I'm a member of your advisory. So I really want to know, because I'm proud to be a member and a member of the CAG, and just because I'm a community member. how did you develop and choose your advisory committee? Because that's what we're talking about, the community informing the research.
Okay, thank you for that question. I have used the advisory committee throughout my research a couple of times, and the purpose has changed a little bit because it's clear. I think you see, I do community-based participatory research. I really involve community in my research. But so first, I decide on my purpose for that particular advisory committee. And since I am working to reconstruct the app, this research advisory committee is specific for that. So I just start by thinking about what is it that I want from the community, because I need to know what I need in order to decide the members. So I, develop a mission and a vision for that advisory, think about my expectations and the number of members. And for this advisory board, because it's focused on the app and because I am initiating this project here in Chicago, I am looking for community members in Chicago that work with the moms. So I'm not just looking at community members such as mothers, breastfeeding mothers. I include healthcare providers. So I have doulas, I have peer counselors, I have lactation consultants. And this is real important because I'm not a internationally board certified lactation consultant. I am a breastfeeding advocate, old NICU nurse. I don't work in the clinic anymore. I'm not in the hospitals. So it's real important to include the people, the users that will use the app. So I kind of start there. And I wanted representation from both the hospital setting and the community setting. So that's how I did my recruitment, was based on my needs for the app. Because I plan to, when I launch this app and do another small study with African American mothers, I'm going to start with doing pregnancy, because I hope that I want to see the use of the app through pregnancy, through delivery, and into postpartum, 6 months. And so, I needed to have members that cover representation of all those areas. So that way I can be sure that the app really meets the needs of the mother, but also meets the needs of the, on the clinical side, the lactation consultants, doulas, peer counselors, the healthcare providers that will use the app. Because one part of my app is that you can monitor the input. So the data that the mom enters in the feeding log, it can be monitored on the clinic side. And I can see and get notifications on who's not breastfeeding enough, who, has maybe a problem that I may need to contact. In my previous pilot study, by monitoring that, I was able to catch a mom who had a high number of entries for breastfeeding, but she had very low infant diapers and no stool entries. And so I was able to take that notification and contact her and say, hey, I see you breastfed like 10 times today and 16 yesterday, but you've only put in 3 diapers. How are things going? So it's able to make that connection. So it's real important to me to involve all the people who are connected with that, because if it's not something that you want or doesn't meet your needs as a clinic provider, it's not usable. So I really want to increase the chances that I have an app that's, going to be used and that it meets the needs of both the provider and both the breastfeeding mom. So I just recruited to match that need for this advisory board. I asked people to have a 1-year commitment to it, because it's going to take about a year to put that together and reconstruct it. But the good thing about the advisory board is that I also can ask and get feedback and use the members as a sounding board for how I conduct my research, where I recruit. Say I want to recruit moms in X, Y, and Z. So I present that to my members, and a lot of times people say, well, why are you doing that? Moms are not gonna, it's just things that we don't think about, because guess what? I'm jaded because I'm the researcher, I'm the mom, and I'm all, and I think I would do that, but no, in real life, that's not what people would do, because it doesn't fit this clinic or it doesn't fit this community. So you get good feedback. So I like to use my advisory board before I launch my research, and getting that feedback and using them as a sounding board, so that when I start, I've never had a problem with recruitment, because I've gotten the feedback beforehand and I know exactly how to recruit the particular population and the people I need for my research.
Very, very important, as you say, because people in the community know. And I think Chicago, we know what happens on the South Side, but somebody else knows what's happening on the West Side or on the East Side. So thank you for including us in your group. And now we've got a little more time, and I asked Margie, we're going to continue It looks like Marjorie is gonna stop and open up for us to have a few questions from the Q&A. Is that right, Marjorie? Are we gonna go to some other questions now?
Yes, let's move into our Q&A. And I know we had some questions in the chat. It sounds like a few were answered. So I'm going to ask one from the chat. And then if folks did not put questions in the chat, but would like to ask them out loud, feel free to use the raise your hand function. And then I'll call on you and you're welcome to ask your question. If you didn't put your question in the chat yet, but you have one, please feel free to put it in there as well. So there are a few questions about kind of how to get involved or support Dr. Jefferson and Dr. Johnson's research. So I know folks were asking about how to be a part of REACH, how to be a part of the diaper study. So I don't know if either of you can share a bit of information about if you're allowing people to participate right now or kind of future plans for expanding to a larger group of people.
Okay, I am in the planning stages, in the beginning stages of my project. I have started to form the advisory board for my REACH project for the Mother's Milk Connection app. So if you're interested, you can just email me at Urmeka_Jefferson at Rush. It's easy to find. It's, you know, just if you Google me, that all comes up. But you can email me and let me know your interest. Right now, I do need more breastfeeding mothers on the advisory board because I have a couple of healthcare providers and I try to keep it small. I don't want more than 10 to 12 people on the advisory board. Thanks Marjorie for putting that in the chat. So if you're interested, just email me because sometimes there are ways that we can connect, whether it is the advisory board or serving in another way on the project. Because I will, once the project gets underway next year, will need to hire a peer counselor to participate in the project. I will also need a research coordinator. So those are some other areas. And then I just have community partnerships. So it may not be actively involved in the research itself. So just email me anytime, anybody that's interested in it. And I will not launch the app publicly. Right now it's just strictly for research. So we're in what I call version 2.0. So we're gonna work to reconstruct it, refine it. Then I'm gonna get a recruit from a clinic to test the usability because I want to make sure I have everything ironed out and it functions like it should. Get more mothers to give me feedback, and then once I've done that, then I'll move to a larger scale. You know, so we're looking at like 2 to 3 years from now, being on a larger scale of being able to access the app.
And I will echo, I guess, if you are interested in any part of what I talked about, please send me an email. It's elj54@cornell.edu. We're always, I'm always looking for enthusiastic, brave members for the team. It's a lot of stool. That it's like a really lot of stool. And, but it's a lot of, it's really amazing. Even when you're looking at it, you're like, whoa, that was a rough day for baby number one. And so, but also we are actively recruiting for the study. So if you are happen to be pregnant and your baby hasn't taken their first poop yet, it's one of the inclusion criteria. Please let us know. I should leave. Yeah, we'll send you this box and if you're willing to, you know, send us 36 poopies, you know, we are, you know, really, it's really, I think, you know, Dr. Jefferson was talking about something about how, like, just with the app-based thing, you can really understand, I think, your participants a lot better because you're getting this real-time kind of data of like how many entries are people putting in, do they need help, do they need support. We also work with telelactation support because we work within the first 3 months trying to support exclusive breastfeeding during that period of time, but working with the breastfeeding goals and the feeding goals of moms individually. So yeah, if you know anyone, we are. I think that's one of the challenges too. Like this type of study takes a lot of money, and so it's just like always keeping up with the funding, which is my job. But you know, I think that, we want to expand really, really fast, but right now we are recruiting, trying to recruit up to 100 moms to complete this particular study.
Great, thank you both. Helen, do you have a question?
I do. I was wondering if participants in the study would be receiving any stipends.
Yes, we try for the diaper study, for the diaper cohort, we try to give 3 months of diapers. It's like $180 though. It's, but we, amass that to the diapers that you would use during that period of time. So.
And for my study also, I definitely take into consideration the time it takes for people to participate and engage with me on my advisory board. So I do provide stipends for members of the advisory board for every meeting that they attend, and kind of walk through the steps and actively engage with that. They get a stipend, and then I also provide a stipend for the mothers that participate in my research. And that always varies depending on the level of engagement, but I try to do gift cards. In the past, I've done electronic gift cards. Sometimes I do Target, Walmart. So that's some of the things I decide, like with the advisory board, what's the best type of incentives or, to give for people for taking the time to participate in my research and provide me with that feedback.
Urmeka.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from attendees? Either folks who want to ask something out loud or something you'd like to put in the chat? If not, I have a couple more questions that we can ask Dr. Jefferson and Dr. Johnson. So for both of you, would you mind sharing a bit about how you decided to become a researcher, and kind of how you talk to people about that decision, or maybe influence other people to kind of maybe change the perception of research that might exist in Black communities?
Okay. Well, I became a researcher because working in the hospital, I really just saw the difference that we saw in breastfeeding disparities. Working in the NICU, seeing the high rates of necrotizing enterocolitis and the low rate of breastfeeding among African American moms, and just working through that and seeing, okay, we can do better than this. So what needs to be done? We need an intervention. And I was living in Memphis, Tennessee at the time, and we had high infant mortality, and I was working on a committee focused for that. And we were talking about a lot of things about access and how do we improve breastfeeding in this one community. But one thing I noticed that a lot of women were not breastfeeding, and a lot of them had babies in the NICU. And I thought, the light bulb for me just went off there. And that's where I was always an advocate for breastfeeding as a nurse. But that's where I really got bit by the research bug, and it was like, we have to figure out what can we do, how can we improve this, so that we can have better outcomes for the African American mother. And so from there, I went back to school, got my PhD, and I have been working on breastfeeding research ever since. So I typically share that story with students that are interested in, want to know how do you get into that. It's just a passion for me. It's something that I care about and helping my community, and thinking about my own experience. I didn't have a good breastfeeding experience, and I even remember thinking, oh my God, why would anybody want to breastfeed? This is not working, and I was like, I've helped hundreds of women learn to breastfeed, but my baby wouldn't cooperate. What is going on? So having my own personal experience with breastfeeding also was a driver for that to see that, this is the real world experience, and it's not as easy as it looks, as the videos that we show, where the baby just hops on there. So I think that's a lot that drives what I do. And so working with the community, I think that passion comes across with women. And so just helping to get women engaged. A lot of people who participated in my research have told me that I put my picture on all my flyers, and they have told me that I saw that you were an African-American mom or woman interested in conducting this research. So it made me feel a little bit more comfortable about wanting to participate, or at least contact you and see what this was about and see how I can get involved, because I was happy to see that somebody cared about what I thought or what I wanted. as a mother and what I need from the healthcare system?
For me, I think, you know, some similar themes in that I really enjoyed being able to solve research questions. I think or just the thought that you can bring like new knowledge into this world, and that you can, you know, how are the ways to do that? I think my training was really far from what I'm doing now, but realizing that I had amassed some tools that could be really helpful. Everything was kind of like pointing me towards, you know, studying how nutrition affects the microbiome. And to me, one of the most interesting, or the most unbiased, the most interesting time is really during the infant period, where you have this like kind of quantifiable constant source of nutrition, right? For like, you know, 6 months and then on to a year, where you're like, what is this doing to support this, all the growth needs and all the developmental needs of baby? So if we could, you know, apply some of the like cutting edge techniques to this, like, wouldn't that be a fascinating way to spend the rest of your time? And so I think that's how I got there. I had a training in molecular biology, and then really applying this to, and then getting a position here at Cornell, where there's just such a great history of maternal child nutrition, and just really sitting and soaking it all in for a few years and saying like, wow, I think that what we're doing in the lab could really contribute to that, and having kind of the freedom to be able to throw resources at asking some really new questions in the field. So that's really exciting to me, and research to me, like even this project has been really fun and really hard. And so if you want to do something that feels really hard and you know, really fun and really hard, I think you know, this, you know, academic research is really the way to go there. And I've got to meet like so many people and learn so many new things that that's what really has kept me in the field and such. Yeah.
Thank you both. We have two, I think, quick questions in the chat. So Denise is asking, is there a particular age group that you want to work with, specifically because their entity works with teen parents? And I'm not sure if that relates to both of you, but if both of you want to answer, that would be great.
Okay. My research right now is for African-American moms that are older than 18 years old of age, that are 18 and older. Just because I'm looking to work with adults at this time, because I think teen moms have a different set of social dynamics, and I don't want to mix them all and do them at the same time. I do plan to expand to using the app with teen mom, but that'll be a separate study. So for me, just for dynamics of research and institutional review board criteria, I am working with moms that have graduated high school and that are over 18.
Yeah, ours inclusion criteria too is 18 to 45. So
great, thank you both. And then the last question that we have is, Dr. Johnson, is there a way for folks to read about your findings so far, the things that you presented today?
Sure. So the diaper, we don't have anything published on that. It's a really large ongoing study that we have, but the things that I talked about kind of microbial metabolites in the beginning, I can put a link to the papers that we have on that. It's kind of dense, I put it in the things, but we if you go to my website, we do have there are some articles that we are writing or that will come out that are like 1-pagers on what we've done and the kind of technologies that we're trying to develop to investigate these questions.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to share our final kind of closeout slide. So thank you all again for being here. It was so great to have you. I know I really enjoyed hearing from all of our speakers and the really interesting research and work that they're doing. We would love for you to please complete our feedback survey. You can either type in the link that's on the screen or scan the QR code with your cell phone with your camera to take the survey on your phone. If you're interested in doing that, I'll also send the link out in a follow-up email. The survey shouldn't take more than about 3 minutes, and it's really helpful for us to kind of understand how we can make these webinars better for those who are attending. And just as a reminder, I'll send a recording, the slides, and information about the continuing education credits or units in an email after the event. So be on the lookout for that. And then I encourage you all to stay connected with NOHE, the Chicago Regional Breastfeeding Task Force, as well as Dr. Johnson and Dr. Jefferson, who shared their emails in the chat. So, you know, we would love to keep the conversation going, and sounds like Dr. Johnson and Dr. Jefferson are interested in potentially having folks get involved in their work who meet the criteria that they're looking for. So please do stay in touch. And that's all I have. So I'll leave this slide up. I'll turn it over to our wonderful speakers to see if they have anything to say in closing. But if not, I think we're all done for our webinar today.
In closing, I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out to participate and engage with us about our research, because it really does mean a lot for me as a researcher to be able to share my evidence, my research, and my work with the community. So thank you for having that interest and taking time to participate.
Yes, I'll say in closing too, as Marjorie mentioned, looking forward to also the future, the continuation of these conversations, because it's just, like Joanne mentioned, it's just so exciting, kind of an exciting time to be a part of all this, and also looking forward to you know, everybody's feedback and such. So thank you for having me.
And I'll end by thanking you all for being here. And if you didn't see, my grandbaby joined me because she's 22 months and just now stopping breastfeeding and is going to school. And you know, because she's not breastfeeding now, those bugs are getting her. So thank you all for being here to learn about breastfeeding, providing human milk. I love you all, and keep helping those families.
Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next time.